Hey, John Zombro here with the Lifetime Athlete, and you are awesome. Thanks for being with me today and for being a part of this wonderful community entrenched in peak performance and lifelong health. Today's video is going to be the first of three in a series on understanding human movement. This first edition will focus on planes of motion and how human movement exists in three-dimensional space. In part two, we'll take a look at movement analysis, and part three will go over interventions and optimization. The information I'm going to share today is an important part of physical therapist education, but in reality it is also utilized among healthcare, research, fitness, and athletic professions. It's all about biomechanics, and it's sometimes what I call physics applied to physiology. Understanding movement and unlocking issues with pain and performance is one of the most common topics, driving questions I'm frequently asked when I'm conducting online coaching. And those consultations can be with a motivated and curious athlete or fitness enthusiast, or with a colleague in physical therapy, coaching, or training. And this happens as I work with them in a mentorship capacity. Okay, getting back to this understanding movement, where we want to gain a deeper understanding is with the three planes of motion, which we sometimes call the cardinal planes. Let's take a look at a basic model which helps me to illustrate the planes. So the cardboard represents the plane depending upon where I hold it. Each plane has an axis of rotation signified by this white pipe, which is oriented perpendicular to the plane. I'll use a simple tool to represent a limb or a body segment. It is about this axis of rotation which every joint, and actually even the body itself, rotates within the plane. Honestly, even though we use different terms to describe movement in each plane, every movement is a rotation because your body segments are always moving about the axis in that angular fashion. Now let's take a closer look at this concept. We have a sagittal plane, which bisects the body through the midline, and when viewed from the side, displays forward, backward, or up and down motion, known as flexion and extension. Next is a frontal plane, which, when appreciated from the front, depicts side to side or medial lateral motion, known as adduction, which is moving towards midline, or abduction, which is moving away from the midline. And finally, we have a transverse plane, which allows us to describe rotation occurring about that axis using either a top-down or a bottom-up view. Now, in that sagittal plane, if I raise or elevate or flex my shoulder, the joint is moving about an axis of rotation at the glenohumeral joint. If I flex my entire spine and trunk, this is more of a whole body function. Just like doing a squat uses a large portion of motion in the sagittal plane. Now in the frontal plane, moving my arm out to the side is abduction, abduction, and doing an exercise like a jumping jack or a skater bound is emphasizing frontal plane motion of the entire body. Lastly, in the transverse plane, when I twist or rotate either a limb or my entire body, I'm performing a lot of transverse plane motion. Here's where things start to get exciting, at least for me, and I think for you too. Human movement is triplanar in that motion occurs to varying degrees in all three of those planes at the same time. First, let's acknowledge how the cardinal planes exist and orient to one another. And I want to thank my friend, Professor Rufus Cohn, for his assistance with this diagram. Now here's the point I want to illustrate. Even if the body is moving primarily in one plane, such as locomotion or walking, in a forward direction in a relatively straight line. So you can picture that. Motion is occurring within the body in all three planes to generate that outcome. This principle gets back to physics and how it's related to anatomy and to physiology. The way our bodies are assembled and how we create movement is helical in nature. Just like your DNA has that double helix structure, your bones, joints, tendons, muscles, fascia, as well as the thoracic and abdominal cavities are designed to wind and unwind, not unlike wringing out a towel, to both store and release energy. Humans are shape-shifting beasts who skillfully manage pressure and tension to load and explode. Whether you like to think of our movement as a series of levers and linkages that push and pull, or as a viscoelastic fluid chamber that uses pressure differentials to almost squirt the body along. It doesn't matter. All those models have application as long as you appreciate the winding and unwinding and essentially non-linear way the body works to create movement, even if that movement is linear. So locomotion is perhaps the easiest movement to use as an example. Like I mentioned before, viewed from the side, a person walking along looks like he or she is only moving in the sagittal plane. And we know they are doing that primarily. However, that same individual, when viewed from the front, will also display a slight side-to-side shift with every step. And in the transverse plane, as if you were looking down, rotation will be identified in the extremities and the trunk as those winding forces go up and down the kinetic chain or movement chain within the body. The percentage or degree of motion in each plane that any given movement of the body uses will vary based on your unique anatomy, the specific demands of the task at hand, and the presence of issues which you may or may not have with mobility, strength, stability, or motor control, if those things are present, as well as finally, compensatory or substitution patterns you may have developed to work around some of those things. So all of those things can change how much we move in any given plane. By now you've probably realized that the planes as I presented them are merely constructs to help us to quantify and recognize motion. Adding a layer of complexity now, I bet you've also figured out that triplanar motion is incredibly dynamic. As the body moves, the instantaneous axis of rotation of every joint also moves, and the body blends all those vectors into a composite that represents fluid, supple, graceful, poetic movement. At least this is true in the best movers. And for the most part, you don't have to think about it. It just happens secondary to the brilliant design of the human beast. Because these concepts are so critical, let's use another example with which everyone's familiar. Let's look at another type of plane, and that's an airplane. The aeronautical industry uses the same motion, planes, and axes in aerodynamics applications that we've talked about with human movement. I am on fire today with all these high-tech props. Nothing like a little recycling in the garage. Okay, pitch, or the relationship of the airplane, nose to tail, when viewed from the side and compared to the horizontal, is synonymous with sagittal plane movement. Planes change pitch to adjust airspeed and orient the aircraft for changing elevation. Yaw, and that's Y-A-W, or the position of the plane relative to the direction of travel, is commonly encountered in the presence of wind, which is rarely a straight headwind or tailwind. The pilots will slightly cant the plane in accordance with the wind to maintain course. Now finally, roll occurs when the wings are tilted relative to each other as opposed to being level. And just like pilots use pitch, yaw, and roll in various combinations to navigate the airways, our bodies seamlessly blend that triplanar motion into one beautiful presentation. Or should. Sorry, I dropped my prop. What I'd like to do in all of my coaching applications is help my clients, again, whether that's an athlete or a colleague, be able to see and feel movement. This is the real key to guiding an athlete into becoming a true movement smith, as in someone who owns position and has high competency with movement in any context. And it's one of the secrets in becoming a master clinician who can identify root causes and get real, lasting results with your clients. You don't always have to break movement into 3 planes, but often this way of seeing human function can help you slow it down, take it apart, and then put it back together as a whole and easily identify then asymmetries and compensations, which leads us to our next edition of this video series, and that's analysis. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and you're jazzed at increasing your expertise with human movement. Thank you for joining me. If you're interested in doing some peak performance coaching with me and unlocking your potential as an athlete or as a clinician, you can find me at thelifetimeathlete.com. Until next time, this is Coach JZ, signing out from The Lifetime Athlete.